This is the secluded spire, the drop spot where NA's Rise and Eomzo landed in a Fortnite tournament that they won 5 of the 7 games in. But they weren't alone. After and Risen, yes, there's a Risen and a Rise, contested them at this drop spot. To win a fight like this, you need to ensure you've given yourself a loot advantage, and their plan was simple. One player lands on the west balcony floor spawn, opens up the door and grabs the chest inside, and the other player lands on the south balcony floor spawn and grabs the 2 floor spawns through this door. Then, together, they can use these barrels. This gives them almost instant access to 4 floor spawns, 1 chest, and 2 barrels. If the opponents land above them, this gives those players only 2 floor spawns and 1 chest, so clearly they'd be at a disadvantage. However, on approach, Rise notices that his floor spawn isn't there on the west balcony, so he swerves to the south and lands with Eomzo stealing that gun. He goes straight for the barrels, as harvesting this will give him enough materials to place 1 ramp in front of him, which gives him a minor right hand peek over this door, and breaking the second barrel, giving him another 10 shield. At the same time, Risen lands on the floor above him, grabs an SMG and a big pop, which he has no time to pop, and Afton hasn't even landed yet since there's no guns up there to grab, so he swerves past and lands low on the north balcony, grabbing a grey Havoc shotgun. Risen falls down to the same layer, and at this point, Rise and Eomzo have a clear loot advantage. However, the contesting team is about to make a 2 versus 1 push through the door. But it's only a 2v1 because Eomzo has mantled up to the layer that the other players dropped on, realized that they weren't there, and jumped out the window to land directly behind them, creating a perfect pinch. Rise and Eomzo cut off their loot so perfectly that the other team was just forced into a bad position that could be exploited. After looting the remainder of this drop spot, they rotated south to the racetrack to find more players to fight, and here they continued their perfect pinches. With Rise completely wrapping around the back of the other 2 opponents, this allowed him to finish off the first elim and make it a 2v1, despite the fact you can't see this because thank you replay lag. They then are easily able to jump into a lone Chun-Li's box living out Cypher PK's dream, and now have 4 eliminations in a matter of minutes.
Editor's note, that wasn't a Chun-Li, but it was funny, so I'm leaving that joke in.
With their loot completely stacked, they rotate back to the secluded tower to wait for the mythic boss to spawn, as this will give them access to the vault. But what they didn't count on is that a team from Bastion had left, as there was too many players contesting their drop spot, resulting in them rotating all the way down here in a hunt for loot. Eomzo spots them and instantly uses the flare gun to ensure he knows both of their whereabouts. Since the players are focused on Eomzo, Rise sneaks up from the side, claiming height. With the opponents looking directly up, Eomzo plays for angles and tags in an attempt to weaken the opponents. However, he doesn't use enough materials and puts himself in a position to be fully pieced up by the opponent, luckily only winning this fight by an angel. Eomzo managed to get the knock, but being left at 15 HP meant that Rise had to drop down to him to ensure he was safe to heal. This wasted around 20 seconds and almost half of their metal as a duo, but after this, Rise decided to chase him down using the flare gun, but this was another massive mistake, as he was now separated from Eomzo, leaving him susceptible for Reet and Rituals to push him as a solo. After using his metal earlier on, Eomzo has to use nearly all of his hard mats to escape the duo. He constantly changes layers, but Rise makes a key play here in being extremely aggressive to the duo rather than passive, buying Eomzo some time. The pressure is unrelenting from Reet and Rituals as they continually spray every wall, and after a gritty and flare gunning himself, Eomzo and Rise did enough to make Reet and Rituals disengage. The problem is they're now left with crumbs of loot, 17 and 28 builds left respectively, with tons of their shield also missing. But they don't just stay around in this area forever trying to reharvest. They understand that on rotate, you can nearly always reharvest your wood and your brick. Despite getting into a couple of engagements along the way, they make their way up to Brutal Bastion. This is one of the only spots that you can actually reharvest your metal in on the entire map, almost no matter who landed here. The other alternative is getting their combat cache, but unfortunately it was already taken by the time they got there. By the time they left here in the 5th zone, they had both almost capped up their metal, nearly capped their brick, but still had 0 wood. Just like there are solutions to no wood in real life, there are solutions in game too. Rise and Eomzo rotate all the way through to the north side of the zone, which is the Deadside, and since there's no players around here, this gives them the freedom to reharvest as many trees as they want. Since they're already on the Deadside and they get a lucky 6th zone pool, they can continue this exact same strategy strategy into that next zone. When that zone begins to open up, they utilize some of the wood to tunnel their way through away from the players that are surrounding them and reharvest the mats as they go. Not only can they reharvest their materials here, there's actually a hollow chest spawn which Eomzo can grab 3 shieldfish from, which was really required as between them they had no big pots. Since they're on the north side of the zone, which is the Deadside, the congested side was the total south, and this is actually where the next zone pulls. Now you may think this is going to be a difficult rotate for them to make, however it's actually much more simple. Since the south side is the congested side, the majority of the players are already along the wall of the zone here, which means they can just white line it into the opposite side of the zone because there's going to be no one there. For the few teams that do have line of sight onto them, when they're exposed, all they do is just use a small amount of wood and make a relatively easy rotate into this next zone. So this Deadside and refarming strategy got them from around 20 builds each up to just over 100 builds each in the 7th zone. Now this season, with kinetic blades being removed and there not really being any mobility items at all, players suck at rotating, but not Rise and Eomzo. This rotate to the 8th zone in previous seasons would have just been a short use of a mobility item, but now they have to do it by foot. But the problem is that there's a big bad team at the top of the hill completely in their way that'll watch every move that they make. Well, Rise has been delaying his reality augments and he has wild wasp weaponry, and Eomzo has an infantry slot that he can carry the jars. They throw one of these jars at the team that has potential sightlines on them and then rotate whilst this team is distracted. This means that they don't need to build for this section of their rotate at all and only start that once a second team has sightlines on them. Now because the safe circle spawns outside of the previous one, they have to sit and stagger and wait a little bit before they can make the rotate. And in this time they pick up a refresh, which is completely hidden by server lag once again. But the remainder of this rotate will be a tricky one as it pulls directly up on top of a mountain. Whoever makes it there first will have an easy ticket to win the game. Because this pulls through old builds, they can just sprint on low ground all the way up the hill. Eomzo is able to get ahead and be the first to climb up the mountain, whereas Rise trickles behind a little bit. He does one really nice mechanic where he places a ramp below him, a wall in front, and then another ramp over his head to block himself from as many angles as possible whilst using the minimal amount of materials. They do manage to claim high ground on top of this hill. However, I think if this was a higher level lobby, one of the teams at the front would have noticed that it was going up the hill and been able to claim height before Eomzo and Rise. NA sucks. Because they just got these 2 refreshes before the zone started moving, the Wild Wasp weaponry reality augment has given them more jars, and they intentionally focus a team who was looking to take high ground from them to deter them. This works as the team backs off, but their goal switches to maintaining height for the rest of the endgame. Rise holds the mythic pistol, whereas Eomzo holds a flapjack rifle, maximizing their ammo capacity. As I covered in a previous video, the flapjack rifle actually has enhanced structure damage, meaning it's perfect for destroying teams down below. Eomzo ensures he focuses players who are in hard materials, particularly any that have metal, as these are the players that have enough mats to retake height from them. He also noticed a team that had tarped fully to the front side of the zone in metal, and this ramp indicated that they were peeking to look up at the height team. Eomzo is very aware of this play, so naturally ensured he focused this team, also deterring this team from retaking height. The remainder of the endgame is very similar, where the teams who are second height and in hard materials to weaken them, get to front side of zone, and repeat. Out of the 200 ammo that Eomzo had at the start of moving zone, he managed to pick up 3 more eliminations. So clearly the flapjack is an incredibly powerful weapon on height. Since every time you get an elimination with Wild Wasp weaponry, you get 1 more Wild Wasp jar, Rise sees a knocked body down below and finishes it. Now despite the fact he doesn't get the point for this, he still gets an additional Wild Wasp jar which he can throw down below. Ideally you would throw this at the front side of zone, as players would need to tarp into this, as the Wild Wasps don't really move that much, so throwing it at the back doesn't benefit you that much. Once the game is about to come to an end, an interesting consequence of having no siphon is that players can drop down for height and fight the players who are playing for heal off. If Eomzo had lost this fight, the other player wouldn't have gotten the plus 50 white HP, meaning heal offs can be disrupted way more. He gets pieced up down below, but Rise has been carrying 2 medmiths this entire time, giving him 30 seconds of heal off, which is more than enough for him to win the game. You may have noticed I didn't talk that much about how they hold height, and that's because I've actually covered that in this video right here in why it's so hard to beat Queasy and Vino.